we are recording. And let me go ahead and get ready to present here. All right, so good evening, clinical educators. Welcome to the Clinical Educator webinar series. Tonight is about how to support your candidate on the edTPA product. So I'm Dr. Tom Fisher. I'm going to take you through in this next half hour or so. I'll take some questions, and we're going to talk about acceptable supports. We'll talk about due dates and just helping keep your candidate on the proper pace. Okay, so here's the agenda. Do you know about edTPA? So I'll go over some basics there. I'm going to talk about the edTPA one-pagers that should be available to you. If not, they definitely will be on our website, or they will be sent out with this recording. I'll talk about some of the due dates. There are some differences based on programs. We'll talk about what the candidates should be doing now in different programs, because like I said, there's different due dates. I'll talk about how you can help, which goes back to some of those things that we'll talk about in the one-pagers. I'll talk to you about who you can contact, and then, of course, I'll leave some time for questions. So getting right into it, here's some edTPA need-to-knows. So edTPA is a 3 or 4 task. So 4 tasks, that is only LED candidates, so elementary education candidates only do 4 tasks. Everybody else does 3. And the product evaluates the candidate's ability to plan. So that's task 1. So that's where they do their 3 to 5 lesson plans. They're also evaluated on how they instruct. So that's task 2. That's the video that they're going to make. And the video segments come from the activities that are in those 3 to 5 lesson plans. Task 3 is how well the candidate assesses the students in your classroom. And again, those assessments are made from those 3 to 5 lesson plans. If you are working with an LED candidate, the LED candidate does a task 4, which is sort of a mini version of the whole process. And instead of looking at literacy, which is what is part of the first 3 tasks, task 4 is about math. So that's pretty much the what the product looks like. All right. edTPA has replaced the Praxis 1 for pedagogy. So many of us have that are licensed teachers in North Carolina that are listening tonight or viewing this video later on. Most likely you did Praxis 1. And then you did Praxis 2, which was your content area, or if you did foundations, that was for LED. But everybody did Praxis 1 for pedagogy, and now that's being replaced. So the student teachers do not have to do Praxis 1. They now do edTPA instead. edTPA is required by the state of North Carolina to become initially licensed, which means North Carolina made this law. The legislature in North Carolina has made this law. This is not just a UNC Charlotte requirement. This is a license requirement by the state of North Carolina that happened in fall of 19, was the first semester that it was consequential. We have been working with it for quite a long time at UNC Charlotte, but fall of 19 was the first time that the passing scores were set, and we had to use those to be recommended for licensure. edTPA must be done with actual students because it's performance-based. So unlike the foundations test or the Praxis 2, you're not going to take this on your own time. You have to do it when you're actually working with students. So that's why you're going to see some of those early due dates that I'll show you in a second. edTPA was created by Scale. This is very similar to National Board. So if there's people out there listening that are National Board certified, this mimics it very much. All right, so you'll probably recognize it if you're a National Board person, or if you're going through the National Board process right now, you'll recognize some of the requirements. And it's externally scored by Pearson, the textbook publisher. So that's who handles collecting all these products and then having people like myself. I've been a scorer in the past. So what they do is they hire people. Anyone out there, sitting out there, could be a scorer. You just have to go through a rigorous training program to do that, and then you do get paid fairly well to score these products. Last bullet there, edTPA is not 100% hands-off. So clinical educators and faculty site coordinators like myself, we do have a role to help the student teachers and sort of guide them in this process. So that's what I'm talking about here in this next slide, where I'm talking about some of these one-page supports that, that may have been made available to you, or they're on our OSCP website. And like I said, they'll go out with the video after the fact as well. So I'm going to share my screen in both of these documents. So one document is actually given to all institutions by scale, and what it does is it outlines what is or is not an acceptable support for edTPA. So I'm going to take you guys to that one right now. Let me escape out of the presentation, and let me pull this up. All right, so here it is. All right, so like I said, you'll be getting this PDF in the near future to check out. And there's a bunch of legalese here on the first page. Then if we go to, bear with me. All right, if we go to page 2, all right, you can see where it's talking about there's acceptable supports for candidates within the edTPA process. And so you can provide candidates with access to the handbook and explanation materials. So we do that. There's a thing called rubric level progressions that we give them. You can engage candidates in formative experience aligned with edTPA, like practice assignments. We do that. We can recommend specific activities that they can use. We can explain the scoring rubrics. You know, we can take a look at, we can evaluate and debrief observations and talk about things that are rubric oriented that we might be able to see out there. We can offer seminars where we talk about skills and abilities identified in edTPA. So, you know, that's something that I do, and we show them like exemplars of students that have come before them so that they can look at that work. All right. So these are acceptable supports. So looking at the planning, we can provide a timeline. So that's one of the things we do. We give a recommended schedule. You can do some co-planning of a learning segment. So you can start talking about some of the justifications and some of the analysis that you do, all right, before they get to the process of working on their own edTPA plans, which they're already doing. You're definitely going to have to provide them with information about students with disabilities or other, you know, legally identified things like ELLs or 504s. You're definitely going to have to let them know about these kind of accommodations because they're your students and we wouldn't know this information otherwise. So information that goes into the context for learning, it's going to be important that you help provide that as well. All right. Let's take a look at the last page here. All right. You can provide different graphical organizers, checklists, you know, and we do that. We have those things. It's sort of like when you're going to see with some of that with the next one pager that I'm going to show. You can ask questions about some of the stuff they're doing and ask them why they're doing it. You know, one of the things we find out from candidates all the time is like, hey, we have the district that I'm in has a new curriculum that they have to use. We totally understand that. Candidates are not going to create everything 100% from scratch. All right, we know that that's not happening. So what has to happen is students have to give credit where credit's due. So when they write up their commentaries, they're going to talk about where they got materials from, whether they got it from the internet, whether they got it from PLCs, whether they got it from, you know, curriculum that was developed in a district or a state, you know, that is, you know, something that they bought, right? So they have to identify where they got this information anyway. Nobody thinks that candidates create all this stuff from scratch. So they can use things that you're using or have used in the past. We just want them to be able to put their spin on it, and we want them to be able to explain why they're using it, okay? So we want to know that they're doing that. You are definitely going to have to help them, you know, capture their video, all right? You're definitely going to have to do that because, you know, they're in your classroom and it's going to be hard for them to actually shoot their own video, so it'd be helpful to be the camera person for them. All right, so we definitely need you to help them do that. All right, so you can see that was the last bullet there. All right, so what are unacceptable forms of candidate support? So there was a lot of things that you can do. There was a lot of bullet points there. And now you're going to see the things that are unacceptable. So you can't edit the candidate's drafts prior to submission. All right, so that means you can't take their work and change it in any way, shape, or form. All right, you cannot critique their work before. So if they've written up their commentaries, you can't say, hey, you should do this instead, or change this sentence. You can't read their work and tell them what to change. You're going to help with the video, but as you can see there with that third bullet point, you cannot watch their videos with them after the fact and tell them which video clips they should use for submission. All right, you help them with the video, but it's up to them to watch their video after the fact and decide which clips they're going to use. All right, one thing I know that we do is we do show them clips of previous candidates so that they can see some of these best practices in the video. So a lot of those things are already done at the university before they get to you. And then the last bullet there, you can see it says uploading candidates' materials to the Pearson ePortfolio platform. And we're not really worried about that because you wouldn't have access to the ePortfolio. They don't know what it looks like. If they don't know what it looks like, unless you all did edTPA, you probably wouldn't know what it looks like. But the good news is we actually have a video that shows a candidate going through the process of registering and setting up the ePortfolio. So we do have that resource available to them as well. So as you can see, there's only 4 things listed that are unacceptable. And there's a plethora of things that you can do to help your candidate. All right, so that's the first one-pager that I wanted to draw your attention to. All right, so let me get back to the presentation. All right. So the other document that I'm going to show you is an in-house document. And what it does is it kind of gives you a weekly or sort of a bi-weekly breakdown of what the candidate should be doing by weeks, what you can do, and then, it takes it right up to submission. So, like I said, I'm going to make this available to you, but I'm going to show it to you right now. So let me go ahead and escape back out of here for a second. And let me share that document with you. All right, minimize that one, and here it is right here. All right. Let me give you a look at this. So this is a one-pager that I put together for clinical educators, and you can see right here, weeks 1 or 2, this could be most likely midterm exams, or it could be work days depending on the semester, because obviously we also have student teachers that do this in August, and when they start in August, it's usually work days. So what are the student teachers doing? That's that middle column there. They should be reviewing their handbook. They take an edTPA quiz with us. They should be reviewing the pacing calendar with you all so that they can try and find their topic, because we do give them a window of when we want this information taught. So they should be looking for a topic somewhere in that teaching window. So in August, our teaching window was in September. So in January, the teaching window is February for some, late January for others. So you could also review the standards and objectives with them, because nobody knows those standards and objectives better than the classroom teacher who's working with the student teacher. So in the far column there, he says clinical educators can do. So you can ask them about their planning paradigm. So what are they supposed to be doing? What are they supposed to be teaching across these 3 to 5 lessons? All right, so everybody has like a paradigm that's very broad that you can ask them to share with you. You should definitely share your pacing calendar with them, right? Because they need to zero in on that topic. And we'll see that coming up in the next few weeks down here below. And then, of course, like I said, you should be working with them about the standards and objectives. In weeks 3 to 4, so in my program, middle secondary, this is weeks 3 to 4 for my student teachers, they are actively planning their lesson plan. So they're on the back end of this. They're actively involved in the planning. They're getting drafts. They're submitting this. They're going to seminar support. They're starting to think about what's their task 3 assessment going to be. If they're LED, they're worrying about their task 4 ideas as well. And then what are you all doing as clinical educators? Again, over here on the far column, it says you can offer support around the activities and assessments, things that you know that you've used in the past that work. You can, encourage them to put their own spin on these things. You can review the lesson plan templates and ask them questions about what they're doing to try and, deepen their own understanding of what they're working with. All right, weeks 4 to 6, this is when they should be teaching it. So again, for if you're LED listening out there, they're probably already doing this. So they're probably recording and teaching these right now. In middle secondary, our window opens next week. The very first week of February is when we want to see our candidates teaching these lessons. So this is when that's going to happen. And big, and I put it in bold and capital letters there, that we definitely don't want our teachers to be, our student teachers to be full-time teaching and have all the responsibility right now, because they are doing this edTPA. It is required for licensure, and I don't want to say it's a one-shot deal, but if they don't pass, they have to do a retake process, and that is going to delay things, and it could get involved with graduation. So we really want to make sure that we're doing this right, and we don't want to overload them with responsibility, because like I said before at the beginning, I did not have to do edTPA as a student teacher. I did have to do those praxis exams, but those were things I could do on my own time. I didn't have to be working with live students when I did it. So edTPA is a different animal, and we really do need to support our candidates on this and really not overload them with too much responsibility during this edTPA process. All right, so middle column, they actively are teaching this. They're collecting and grading the student work that goes with this. They're obviously recording as many lessons as possible so that they have some options in terms of what video they're going to use. They can begin working on their task 1 commentary, because it really is supposed to be written in future tense. So this is something they could be working on during this time period. Far column, that's the clinical educator again. You can say I put it in bold. We definitely need you to help record the lessons. We don't want you to put anybody out of the classroom. If they didn't bring back the video release form, just sit them out of camera view. You really only need 4 or 5 actual students to appear in a video for it to count as a video. Of course, the student teacher also has to be in the video, but we don't want you putting people out of the class. We don't want to change the dynamic of what happens in your classroom just because we have to record, right? You can offer no direct feedback on the videos at this point. You've got to let them, you got to let them just do it. Help them record it, but they're going to have to watch these videos and figure out what they're going to use. All right, and then finally we get down here, week 7 and 8. This is when they're going to focus on most of their commentary writing. So again, it'd be nice for them not to be full-time student teachers at this point. There's still lots of time left in the semester. The whole month of March, there's going to be very few work days in there. The whole month of March can serve as that full-time, 20 days student teaching for the student teacher. So, be thinking about that. They're organizing their work. They'll be getting access to the Pearson ePortfolio, and that's when they can start going in and starting putting in their work samples. What would you be doing? Focusing, ask them how they're doing on their commentaries, double checking that they have all their stuff. There is checklists that they're supposed to be following that are in their Google Shared Drive folders that you can check up on. And, that's where it takes them to. That week 7 or 8 is where they're going to be turning it in. Some need to knows down here. I also added here, again, in bold, I said now, as of fall 19, this is required for licensure. It is externally scored, all right, and it is absolutely time sensitive, all right. And then there's some bullets there for the student teacher in terms of need to know, in terms of where they can find resources and support. And then there's also some stuff over there for the clinical educator to know and be aware of. Okay, and some of those things that I want to draw your attention to is, we definitely want them working with classes from day one, because they have to build that rapport, in terms of thinking about what group of students are going to be part of the product. Remembering that you can give them resources and materials. They have to give credit where credit's due. Assessments, If you have to give standardized assessments, that's fine. They can give those, but they do have to create assessments that show actual student work that they can give feedback on. So they do need to show the students doing something actively where they're analyzing, explaining, interpreting, summarizing, whatever it is. There's an action verb that is tied to their assessment. We need this to be a performance-based assessment by the students. It cannot be multiple choice because it's going to limit the ability to give feedback. All right, so they can still give any of those tests that you are required to give or that you do give on a regular basis. But we really need you to allow them to create something that shows the students working through that paradigm and also using that action verb. All right, so let me escape out of there. Like I said, you'll get a copy of this. All right, if you don't have one already. All right, you should. All right, let me pull the presentation back up. All right, so we took a look at those. So that was the one-pagers. Let's talk about some due dates. All right, so the big difference between fall and spring for our candidates is that everybody submitted at the same time in the fall. That is not going to be the case in the spring. So the LED and the birth to kindergarten candidates are going to submit on Thursday, February 27th, and they have to do this by, and I always put it in there and I always remind them of this, that it is Pacific time, all right, because this is collected, this portfolio is collected across the entire country, so it does have Pacific time, so it can, capture those West Coast student teaching candidates. And I'll tell you why this time thing is important in a second. So if you are out there listening and you have somebody that's middle grades or high school, if there's special education in middle or high school, if they're in the arts, foreign language, ESL, any of those K-12 licensed areas, if they're in a middle or high school, odds are there might be new students that are being taught, especially high schools. Most high schools did not get new students until this past week, so it would be almost impossible for our candidates to turn in by Thursday, February 27th. So that group of student teachers will turn in 2 weeks later on March 12th, all right, at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time, all right? That's why there's a difference in those submission dates. Most of the LED and the BK people, those student teachers are working with students they already know from the fall and that are the same kids that started in early January. So they have that rapport, they have the ability to jump right in and teach earlier than their high school and middle grades counterparts. Now, here's what I want to tell you about that time cutoff. This is very, very important for your candidates, something good that you want to ask them about because we try to remind them of this all the time. All right, there is a time cutoff, and missing this time still allows them to submit. But what happens is it kicks their product into the next submission cycle. So let's say it hits 12 a.m. Pacific time, which is 3 a.m. in North Carolina. What would happen is if those student teachers say on February 27th, all of a sudden don't turn in their product until February 28th at 3 a.m., it actually didn't really go in for the February 27th deadline. It actually will get kicked to the next deadline, which is March 12th. So that means it takes 3 weeks to grade the work. So that means the student will now be waiting 5 weeks for their results rather than 3 weeks because they got kicked into another cycle because they missed it. All right. If they're going to be late, they might as well just hold on to it until that next cycle if they needed to make any sort of changes to it. So this is one of those things that you want to talk to them about and see how they're doing on their pacing. All right, because they definitely don't want to turn in a couple of minutes late and have it kicked into the next cycle. All right. So what should the candidates be doing now? Remember I told you there were some differences here. So LED and BK, my guess is they've already started implementing these lessons. And they're probably already teaching these things, which means they should already be organizing all of their work in their Google Drive folder so it mimics what they're going to turn in at the end of this scoring period, which is February 27th. So you might want to discuss this with the student teacher, maybe their faculty site coordinator. talking about when they should be picking up full-time, when they're going to be ready for that. So this is what should be going on now, those kind of conversations. All other programs, this is when they should be actively planning. So like I said, my middle grades candidates, they just finished their drafts last week. Now they're working on their assessments. Most people are not going to start teaching their lessons until next week or the week after, right? Because they're not going to be doing that until mid-February for their March 12th due date. So they're definitely going to need you to help record those lessons, all right? And then you definitely want to hold off on them. Maybe they have like, one class right now if they're high school, 2 classes if they're middle grades, and wait on that full time until we get to March. All right, so the month of February is going to be critical for all of these candidates in completing edTPA. All right, again, how can you help? Just some reminders here from the one-pagers. The context for learning. This is demographic information about the school. It's got to be anonymous. This is the IEP information, 504. This is about the number of students in the class. This is going to about any special features if you're an IB school, if you're teaching an AP class, if you're a magnet. These are some things that you want to make sure that go into this context for learning. This is information that the student teachers might not necessarily know. They need your help with this. Task 1, the 3 to 5 lesson plans. You can offer up materials and activities that work. They will give credit where credit's due in their commentary. Task 2, you're helping out with the video clips for sure. You just can't tell them which ones, which days you think are the best. Task 3, again, this is the assessment, and this is where you should be, making sure that they're collecting those work samples, talking to them about giving feedback and the different kinds of feedback that you've given in the past. They're going to have to give their own feedback on this work. You will not give any feedback on these assessments that they give for edTPA. On other ones you can, but not for the edTPA product. And then again, task 4, if you're math, task 4, which is math for LED candidates, again, you're doing some of the same similar stuff, task 1, 2, and 3 there. All right, there is no math video, but there is a math learning segment, and there are math assessments that have to be given, and there is a commentary about math. So the one thing that's different with math and literacy for LED, no video. Okay, no video for math. All right, so who to contact if you guys have questions? Me, Tom Fisher. There's my email address. I can answer just about every question as it relates to edTPA, whether it's handbook or legality issues or technical issues. So I've been working with this for quite a while. That's why they have me do the webinar on this. And then I lead some of the candidate supports as well. So you can reach out to me. There's my email address, tefisher@uncc.edu. Additionally, you'll probably have the ability to see a faculty site coordinator, a couple times a week. They might be in your building. So you might want to, jump on them when they're there and ask them questions if you have pressing questions. And if it's something they can't answer, they're going to kick it to me anyway. But if you can get them in the building and they can answer the question, great. If not, send it over to me. I'm usually pretty good about getting back within 24 hours. All right, so that's the end of the session. I'm going to check to see if there's any questions from the group, and then we'll just we'll call it quits. All right, so let me check and see if there's any questions in the chat box. All right, so any questions from the attendees tonight? You can send me something in the chat box, or you can, raise your there's a little icon there that you can raise your hand, and I can unmute you if you have a question. All right, any questions out there? Any questions for me? Going once, going twice. Anybody have any questions? Checking for some questions. All right, there we go. I see some now. All right. So question came in, is edTPA 5 lessons or 3? It's 3 to 5. All right, so it can be anywhere from 3 to 5, and it really needs to be a minimum of 3 hours of instruction. So it's very clear in the handbook that it's 3 to 5 lessons, but it needs to be at least 3 hours of instruction. And so what happens is sometimes people will list their times in their lesson plan templates, or they may actually write about it in the context for learning and say, hey, my literacy segment today is 45 minutes long. And if they do 3 of 45 minutes, that's actually not 3 hours of instruction. So you have to pay very close attention to that and make sure that you're actually doing at least an hour of instruction along the lines of literacy if you're LED. Most middle schools are between 60 and 75 minutes. Most high schools are 90 minutes, so it doesn't usually become an issue. But if there's some alternative schools out there and they have shorter than 1 hour sessions with the students, then you definitely need to look at that, because I have seen products come back as incomplete because they didn't make the mark of 3 hours of instruction. All right, so hopefully that answered that question. If you go over 5 lessons, that's too much information. So you can get dinged. You can actually get dinged on having too much information. So they like to keep it between 3 and 5 lessons, and then 3 hours is a minimum time for review. So another question was, so can I review the student teacher's lesson plans before she teaches? Well, it's your classroom and you want to make sure that the right stuff is being taught. What you could do is ask questions about why she's doing something a certain way, in terms of if there's something that maybe she should change. You might ask a question in terms of, well, why are you doing that? Do you think that that's the best process for this? And that can kind of send her back to the drawing board, but you can't say, no, don't do that. You should do this instead, okay? Because when she writes about her lesson plans, she has to justify her choices. So maybe what you want to do is you want to look at some of her lesson plans before the edTPA lesson plans to make sure she's kind of following the right trajectory in your class, what you're looking for them to do. Does that make sense? All right, great. All right, other questions for me? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, let me just scroll back through just to make sure. And it doesn't look like there's any further questions. Thank you so much for attending tonight. Like I said, I'll make sure that the names of the individuals that were in attendance tonight will get delivered to the right people for CEU credit. And remember my email address. If you have questions in the future, do not hesitate to reach out, and this recording will be made available, as will those documents if they're not already available to you on the OSCP website. All right, I'm Tom Fisher. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm checking out. Thanks, everybody.